100 million years of Overtrigger discourse. Hey everybody, it's Root Beer, and we're doing this again. This time is specifically because of worlds, the OT kept coming up a whole bunch because that's just kind of what the current meta facilitates. A lot of decks are really aggressive now, and a lot of them have really powerful deck thinning capabilities, combined with the top decks of the current format also getting extra drive checks. It just meant that the OT kept showing up a lot on streams, and it's very deflating to see this immediate game changing card hit the board, especially because for illustration purposes they had this giant rainbow brick that had 100 million written on it in full numbers, so you just see this big rainbow marker that has like 8 zeros on it, and you're like, oh my god. So yeah, talking about banning the overtrigger again because of course we are. They're broken. So something to note about the overtrigger is that because Bushiroad has been designing around their existence, outright getting rid of the concept can have its own problems. You have things like the tree, for example, where the gimmick is you're turboing to the overtrigger. You have things like the festival grade 3s that can remove them for additional effects. And also recently you have Dai Kaiser, where they specifically designed it so you can't use the guard break on the OT. And so I wanted to just have a little discussion, give my takes about the overtrigger. I am kind of in the camp that outright removing the concept of the overtrigger, we're probably a bit too late for that in standard because so many cards have been designed around it. Probably pull it off in premium. There are a bunch of cards that are practically unplayable in that format anyway, so might as well, but for standard it is a little more complicated. So let's go through all of our takes, shall we? First things first, the Nation OTs. Get rid of them. Just take them all out back and just out of the format. So even without the 100 million power, the Nation OTs, their additional effects are ridiculous, like restanding your Vanguard, doubling the power and critical of the front row. Those are things that entire decks are designed around. Like Dragonic Overlord's entire identity is just restanding. And you have things like Seraph Snow, where you have to jump through these hoops and turbo to 10 prison in order to give your front row a bunch of power and criticals, right? So being able to just have that happen in a single card because you got lucky is way too broken. You can't seriously look me in the eyes and tell me that Sagra restanding with a bunch of power, 2 crit, and 3 drives is okay. Come on, be for real. Next up, I don't super mind the 50k shield. I just brought it up with Dai Kaiser, where they are printing guard restricts that kind of get countered by the OT. And in general, the format has gotten so aggressive and the numbers have gotten so big that being able to just drop a 50k shield and kind of almost guaranteed stop at least one attack is really helpful. In a format where defensive power is already lacking, I'm not sure I want Bushiroad to take away shield value. So I would like to keep the 50k shield if we keep the concept of the OT in general. As far as the offensive power of the OT, if we assume that the nation over triggers are getting destroyed, then I'm not entirely sure that I would nerf them down to 10k, because then you have things like Ida's Faro, the blue OT, just becomes a glorified crit trigger, and certainly a lot of decks will still appreciate just having a ninth critical trigger available to them, but I think there is a compromise. I put 15 or 20 just because 20 is a cleaner number, but I think 15 makes more sense. In some scenarios, it can break a 2 to pass if your opponent is guarding by a 15k margin. But there are times where, okay, you guard by 20k and suddenly, the OT is still a 2 to pass, right? And on the defensive side of thing, if you damage check the OT, 15k shield does kind of warp the numbers. Take a look at something like MLB or what's it called? Impaldio, but it's also not so ridiculous that you couldn't account for it or even win the game despite it, right? So I think that would be a decent compromise where the OT still feels unique, still makes it so that like some of the nationless over triggers don't feel weaker than a standard trigger. And then finally, like I've been saying, like I think the nationless OTs are like fine for the most part. A lot of them are just kind of standard trigger effects that we've seen before, but kind of get carried by the 100 million. I think like the blue OT, for example, would still be strong, would still be played, even if the power was maybe nerfed down to 10k. Again, I think 15 would be better, but just saying. Even if it was 10k, a lot of people would probably appreciate having a ninth critical trigger, but it is also not something that is so powerful that the additional effect by itself could win you the game in the same way that something like a Drag Veda or an Eldo Breath can. As far as the other ones, like the red OT is probably the one I am most okay with. I've had games where the red OT comes up and it doesn't feel game determinative. Like I've definitely lost games where the red OT has been checked before. And the purple OT, like it is a big ass heal and it could get you an extra attack, although being honest, a lot of decks don't really facilitate the purple OT super well. It's mostly things like Odium or Licia Fail that clear their own board can use the purple OT. And even things like Varga that also clears its own board, it just rather would have another crit in the deck. And then finally, the yellow OT, that one could be a problem paired with like guard restricts. Right now, it's not as big of a deal because of the 100 million. Like, if you have a guard restrict, you might as well just play the blue OT instead. The extra crit is more likely to just win you the game on the spot. But again, if we nerf the 100 million power as a way of compromising on keeping the OT as a concept, then like the yellow one breaking like guardians against like a guard restrict. So let's say you're playing Blankmire, your opponent guards, you check the yellow OT, you can like break the guard and then still give the power to something else. Like that could be a problem. So that might be something to keep an eye on. And then finally, if we are not doing anything with the concept of the overtrigger, they're going to keep it as it is with the 100 million. I might be willing to live with Valnot, the red OT. Like I said, there have been plenty of games where I've checked the red OT and then still lost. It doesn't feel as immediately game determinative as a lot of the other OTs. And of course, we can probably just keep Obaria, where it just gives 100 million twice. Like, certainly that is strong enough to win the game, but, in some scenarios, it might just be like, okay, your opponent is forced to go to like 5 damage, but it is still like a winnable position, right? So, like, if we are not going to touch the concept of the OT at all, I would probably want one of these two to stay as the only legal overtrigger, and then we'll just kind of deal with the 100 million, baby steps. But yeah, personally, I think I would probably like to see the OTs getting nerfed to like much lower power, something that is reasonable for the game, and then just keep the nationless OTs and ban all the nation OTs. So yeah, that is going to be it for this video. Tell me what you think about the overtriggers in the comment. I know everybody hates them. I know we do this discourse all the time, but it's worth bringing it up when it so clearly ruins something like the World Final stream. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.